Yeah.
And I'm just trying to figure out the best way to.
Sure.
Yeah, sure. So, if somebody's got to hear a voice.
Well, and that's what I'm afraid of with my
Yeah, I know.
2-year-old son, that he'll want to hear.
Because 2 weeks is a long time to be away from mommy, yeah.
I've had really good experience using Viber. So if you have like an iPhone, it's an app, and it's just voice over IP, and it takes up very, very little bandwidth, and there's almost no lag time at all. I've used it overseas quite a few times and never had any issues with it at all. But both people have to have it. So if you have someone at home with a phone that has Viber and someone there with Viber, and there's others, Talkatone, I think is another name of another one, but Viber seems to be one of the more popular ones.
If you're just doing audio, there's lots of options.
Probably want to go with something like that without the visual.
Well, yeah, that's what I mean.
Yeah. So that might work.
With a V?
I think personally, I don't have personal experience because I never make phone calls when I'm over there. So I just send
Right, which
Facebook
is fine.
messages. But I know if you want to talk to your kids, you want to do that, and you need to do that. So there's some ideas. I'll try to find out maybe some more. I'll try to research that a little bit more for you too.
That one is unlimited phone number, so we have to contact.
Okay. All right. Any other questions about what to bring, attack, or what to expect? Okay. So the first night that we met, we kind of went over the general history of the time, and then we began going up the coastline of Israel. And we looked at those places, Jaffa, start there, Tel Aviv, Caesarea, and then up the coastline. And so I thought I would, just the same thing as we're kind of remembering that part of it, I wanted to show this is a real short video clip, but it's kind of about a lot of places up the coastline, so you get an idea of what the Mediterranean coast is like. And this is something north by Acheology, on the Bay of Haifa. There you can see the Bay of Haifa, perfect rendition. This is looking from the north towards the south. But they're able to do some tremendous photography these days with drones and give you some views that you really couldn't get in the past. That was up in the north by Akko. Now, for the review tonight, Here's where I'll go on the review sheet. I think we'll take a break. We'll come back and we'll get started on the lecture tonight. But locate Nazareth, Megiddo, and Jerusalem. Those are the three cities we're going to focus on tonight. We'll cover many other cities more briefly, but Nazareth, obviously, the place where Jesus was raised, where the announcements were originally made of the birth to Mary and Joseph. We want to locate where that is. Megiddo, we talked about before, this is Armageddon. Megiddo. Where is that? And then Jerusalem. So if you've got your line drawing maps, if anybody needs another one, I've got a few more, and you're welcome to pick that up if you'd like. Then what valley lies below Nazareth to the south? Yeah, and Nazareth has existed since what period? How long has Nazareth been around? We'll talk about that tonight. How many times is Nazareth referred to in the Old Testament? How large a population Nazareth at the time of Christ? And this is going to be an estimate. We don't know exactly, but we have an estimate we'll give you. What kind of a reputation did Nazareth have at the time of Christ? You probably know that one. Describe the population of Nazareth today. What valley lies to the east of Megiddo? 9. Approximately how many layers of civilization have been excavated at Megiddo? This is one of the most heavily excavated sites in all of Israel. It's Megiddo. The only one, I think, probably more heavily excavated would be the city of Jerusalem itself. Name some extra biblical records that mention Megiddo. So outside of the Bible, where do we find names? To what tribe was Megiddo allotted? What king of Judah was killed? Explains the etymology of the word Armageddon. Then we'll move to Jerusalem for the rest of these questions. Jerusalem is a fascinating city. Its background is complicated, and if you don't know a few things about its background and its layout, it's easy to become confused when you're in Jerusalem, going around, wondering what you're looking at, where you are. So we'll look at the broad picture, the 3 valleys that are associated with Jerusalem. Number 15, discuss the location of, notice, Mount Zion in quote marks. This is one of the most complicated sites to describe Jerusalem is Mount Zion. 16, where is the Mount of Olives located in relation to Jerusalem? 17, what is the principal water source for the city of Jerusalem in biblical times? Water source located. Number 18, how old are the, and again in quote marks, old city walls? We'll talk about the old city of Jerusalem today versus the biblical city of Jerusalem. They're not the same thing. It's important to keep that in mind. A lot of people are confused about that. Number 19, describe the location of the biblical city of Jerusalem in relation to the old city walls that stand in Jerusalem today. And then lastly, describe the location of the Temple Mount in relation to the old city walls that stand in Jerusalem today. So that's where we're headed tonight, and if you're taking the class for credit and you're taking the quiz this week, these are review questions for the quiz. Okay? Any questions before we take a break? Okay, let's take a 10-minute break. I was getting tired.
Good job.
Pastor Gunn, you come take a look at this. Do you have a moment? I don't know what the deal is. We're getting audio, I think. Of some sort. I don't know what the deal is, but
you don't think it's picking up? Oh, it's no video?
right, and I did everything according to Matt's instructions until about there, and then the instructions deviated from what actually showed up.
Okay.
But so I've got this live event going,
Okay.
but it doesn't show any
Doesn't
video.
show anything. That's
And
turn camera.
this, all he had is for me to open it. And I don't know if you're supposed to do any more than just open it. I can't, if I press stream,
Yeah,
it's all.
no encoder presets.
I don't know if there's an obvious mistake that I'm making or anything that's obvious to
know.
you.
Can you call Matt on his cell phone and ask
Well, he's at work.
him? Okay,
Hasn't replied, but
okay. That's probably the best thing.
nobody's doing it except for me. I don't know.
We do have one student who's taking a class in the
Right.
Bay Area, but if worse comes to worse, I'll have the PowerPoint recorded.
Yeah.
And
And this may be recording on the computer as well.
Right.
I don't know.
yeah,
So,
I don't know. Okay.
All right. So, peace, Beth.
But
Okay, we're so tired. I understand that. Uh-huh. This one. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. Take a look.
So how was the road? Better than last week?
Oh, John's watching it. And that's what I'm using in my life. I forgot to take
Just put it home.
I just did it. So I left the room.
I went to the hospital today, he wasn't there.
yeah. Oh, really?
That's how I clicked on the answer.
But see, she,
Yeah, I'm
she's
like,
very had surgery. Jim buckled. She called.
I'm not doing this school and then they. So it's perfect.
There's some permanent.
No, it is. That's me.
Did you get a lot of cap?
No, I didn't.
So that's something that. I think they're still good.
I mean, not just
Do they have any malaria areas over there?
No, I don't think so. And there are no shots that are
Nothing is
required or
No visa. Would that be a visa?
don't need a visa.
Just a passport.
Yeah. I've never had any problems. I've never known anybody in our tours that have
Too dry.
yeah.
Had what?
It's too dry. Maybe a little bit up in the cooler area, but that's it.
Yeah, there used to be a lot of problems with malaria.
Yeah, they were draining the swamps and stuff.
So they've
We
really.
were talking about that last night.
Mhm. Yeah. Both the Hula Valley and the Jezreel Valley both were swampy, mosquito laden, mosquito infested, malaria. They've taken care of all that.
It's beautiful in the country.
Oh, yeah.
Look at 637, or 630.
Israel's such a unique combination of ancient and modern. You know, it's lots and lots and lots of really ancient stuff. But there's such a technologically advanced area.
Oh, yeah. That is another.
I mean, if you're gonna get sick somewhere, that's the place to get sick, you know, because they've got some of the best medical. Is that right?
Yeah. Good doctors.
I'm surprised, Joe, I thought all their doctors were over here.
Yeah, well, also more. But, yeah, I know missionaries that have their teeth done over there.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Dental tourism. Yeah.
The first son becomes a rabbi, then the second son is a doctor. So lots of doctors.
And the third one, a lawyer.
Yeah.
And everybody's combat trained, right?
Everybody's combat trained, yeah. Yeah, well, that reminds me, we're gonna be having on, the 16th of February, the Israeli Soldiers Tour is coming here to Shasta Bible College. There's an organization called Stand With Us. It's a Jewish organization. Their mission is to try to combat anti-Semitism on American university campuses, college campuses. We had a representative from Stand With Us several weeks ago in our chapel here. It was quite interesting. So they also sponsor what's called the Israeli Soldiers Tour. What they do is they have ex-IDF soldiers, Israeli Defense Forces soldiers, that travel around and usually on college campuses. They share their testimonies of what their experience was like serving with the Israeli Defense Forces. The narrative that you get from the liberal press and the anti-Semitic folks is that Israel's an oppressive force, that they are, cruel and mistreat everybody. They're actually probably, I would venture to say they're probably the most moral and ethical fighting force anywhere in the world today. As an example, when they were fighting this most recent war, the one in the Gaza Strip, before they would bomb what they thought was a terrorist holdout, they would drop leaflets warning the citizens, the non-combatants, we're going to bomb this place. You better leave. You know what army does that anywhere in the world? So they've taken great efforts to try to contact civilian people in times of war by cell phone, trying to make sure that they're away from places of combat. But it is difficult because the people they're fighting oftentimes do use human shields. So the non-conventional methods used by the terrorist enemies of Israel, obviously war is an ugly thing. And there are horrible things that happen in war. But things have been reported incorrectly oftentimes in these wars. So these ex-Israeli soldiers are on tour talking about their experience serving with the Israeli Defense Forces. So they'll be here on the 16th at 10:30 a.m. And we're going to be holding our chapel service across the street because there's more room over at the church across the street. So they've agreed to let us use their sanctuary. And we're hoping for a good turnout. And I think that'll be a very, very interesting experience for everybody. So, okay, let me get tonight's lecture started. This is lecture number 3. We have the review questions that I handed out earlier. And my apologies right now for those that are trying to watch my live stream today. We're having some technical difficulties. We don't know really if it's live streaming or not. We think maybe we've got audio. But we are going to be recording this, and it'll be available on YouTube and also in our campus information system. But we're going to be traveling now, beginning from the Sea of Galilee, where we were last time, then moving down towards eventually Jerusalem. And we're going to spend a fair amount of time talking about Jerusalem tonight, because that is obviously the major city that we talk about, spending more time in and around Jerusalem than anywhere else. But before we get to Jerusalem, we want to go just a little bit north of the Sea of Galilee, and we will be visiting a place called Chorazin. Chorazin is an ancient city from the time of the Bible, and it is actually mentioned by Christ, although we don't have a detailed description of Christ's visit to Chorazin. But based on what Jesus said, we believe he did visit Chorazin and even performed a number of miracles in the city. And if you're following along in your booklets, we're on page 11. This is Roman numeral 11. Chorazin is identified with also the ancient city of Chorazin. It's about 2.5 miles to the north of the Sea of Galilee. As we said last time, the Sea of Galilee is 600 plus feet below sea level. All around the Sea of Galilee, you've got these steep mountains. So from the north side of the Sea of Galilee, you go up. I don't know what the elevation of Chorazin is, but it's up quite a ways above the Sea of Galilee. It was first established in the 1st century BC, and it is one of 3 cities condemned by Christ for having rejected Christ's miracles. So Jesus says, "Woe to thee, Chorazin! Woe to thee, Capernaum." And so Chorazin, he says, if the miracles that had been done, that were done in you, had been done in Sodom and Gomorrah, they would have repented long ago in sackcloth and ashes. And they will actually rise in the day of judgment to condemn this city. So it's an interesting place to visit. By the 4th century, Chorazin was in ruins. And again, this is largely due to earthquake activity in the area. It was rebuilt later in the 5th and early 6th centuries. Chorazin was destroyed in the 8th century. Again, rebuilt in the 13th century and occupied continuously from the 13th century up until the 20th century. Now, in much of Israel, we find the prominence of limestone. Lots and lots of limestone. Limestone is very soft. It's easy to quarry, easy to build stuff out of. But up at Chorazin, we're further north, a different kind of geology. And there's the prominence, the prevalence there of basaltic rock, volcanic rock. And so this is what we're seeing here in the background. This is actually what we're looking at here is the synagogue in Chorazin. We're down at the south end of the synagogue, and you go up the steps into the synagogue. Now, the finely polished stone is reconstruction. The rough stone is original construction from the synagogue. And here, this section here was originally over the doorway going in. You notice the gravestone all around. This is basalt. Very typical of the northern part of Israel. The synagogue was discovered this part of a pillar, and on the pillar the head of Medusa. You don't expect to find Medusa in a Jewish synagogue. But the interesting thing is that, especially in the north part of Israel, we see a number of Jewish synagogues with many of these kind of Greek-type motifs. There's another synagogue a little further south called Aleph, which has a whole zodiac built into the mosaic floor. It's just amazing. But here's the Medusa head. Many synagogues had these types of decorations, but most were defaced during stricter times of enforcement of Jewish laws. This one may have survived defacement because the synagogue was destroyed by an earthquake. Covered up, later on discovered, and brought to light. So what's going on here? Is this a sign of a pot? Or is it maybe like what we have in our churches just last month? Christmas trees. Okay, decoration. Who cares about the pagan connections to these things that we have in our churches? We want our churches to look nice, and so we beautify them with things that are popularly acceptable. There are these things that are going on. A lot of Christians, I think, read their Bibles and think the biblical people were religious people, were very holy, and always walked around in their robes, reciting the Psalms. Well, they were people, like people today, and many of them had just regular human-like interests and concerns. When they decorated their synagogues, they wanted their synagogues to look nice and look modern and contemporary, what people were looking at these days. So this is not that unusual to find a Medusa head on a pillar in a synagogue. This is also found in the synagogue at Chorazin. This is Moses' seat. And Matthew 23, we have Jesus' denunciation of the Pharisees. He talks about those who sit in Moses' seat. In the synagogue, there was a seat of Moses and there was a seat of Elijah. And these were places from which scriptures would be read. Moses representing the Torah, Elijah representing the prophets. So you have the reading from Moses, you have the reading from the prophets, and so Moses' seat would be a place where the scripture would be read. And this was discovered here in the synagogue at Chorazin. If you want to sit on that seat, you can. It's right there, and many people sat and had their pictures taken. This is an amazing house that is still standing. Rock. This is called the House of Arches, and the testimony to the availability of arches to withstand many centuries of earthquake territory still stands. And you go inside and see why it's called the House of Arches. You can go into this house on a hot day and it feels like somebody's got the air conditioner on, because of that stone construction all around, even though the roof is open at this time. And when it was being used, of course, the roof would have been completely closed in. And similarly, in very cold times, it would soak up the rays of the sun, and those that basalt rock then would emit the warmth after the sun went down to keep the reasonably warm. So this is the kind of technology that's now being used in a lot of modern construction, but they had it way back in ancient times. Okay, we're going to come to Gergasa in a moment. Let's just finish up the rest of these notes here. We look at the synagogue. What we're seeing in the synagogue is from the 2nd century AD. Basilica shape. There are 3 hallways separated by 2 rows of pillars. Okay, so you've got a large room there to support a roof. You've got to have pillars down there. So 2 rows of pillars making 3 rows 3 hallways. There are 3 doorways. The central one is the largest. And then the basalt seat of Moses, we saw a picture of that, carved from a single block of basalt, chair where the reader of the Torah sat. And in Aramaic, the inscription reads, "May Judah, the son of Ishmael, who made this hall and its staircase, be remembered for good, as his reward may have a share with the righteous." So just a little testimony to the guy that donated the seat of Moses. Just like you might have the church foyer, somebody that donated money to build the foyer or something like that. Okay. Coming back down to the Sea of Galilee, we're looking now towards the east side of the Sea of Galilee. If you remember our discussion last week, we said that on the east side was the more Gentile type of territory. East of the Sea of Galilee was the region of the Decapolis, the 10 cities that were very Greek in their culture, their language, their settings, and inhabited by a lot of Gentiles. So we're looking over towards the east side, looking southwest above the southeast side of the Sea of Galilee. On the horizon, from left to right, while we're on this other side, is on the west side, from left to right, we're looking at Mount Gilboa, Mount Tabor, and then the Nazareth Ridge along here. We're going to talk about Nazareth in just a moment. But from the Sea of Galilee, if you're looking across towards the west, you're looking out towards Nazareth and then beyond over to the Mediterranean. On the eastern shore, bottom center, right down in here, is Kibbutz Ha'on, where the harbor of Gadara was located. For a number of years, Western Baptist College operated a school in Israel. They were located at Kibbutz Ha'on. We used to stay at a kibbutz actually just to the south of Ha'on, right down in here. It's a very beautiful spot. But we have the account of the casting out of this legion of demons that takes place in Gergasa. So if you're taking a look at your notes, you're located on the eastern shore of the Sea of Galilee, between Susita and Bethsaida. Bethsaida up in the north, further south, Susita sits way up on a hilltop, part of the Decapolis formation of cities. Again, Susita is the Hebrew name, Hippos is the Greek name. It's named after the horses. Between Bethsaida and Susita is this one region, there's one place where the slope is such that it fits the description in the Bible with this herd of swine and having the demons cast into them and rush down into the sea. It's really the only place along this eastern side of the Sea of Galilee where that can be. So we're fairly certain of the location. So point number 2, the site of the healing of the Gergesene, the demoniac, and the drowning of the pigs, recorded in Mark chapter 5. Now notice, the Gadarenes were residents of Gadara, one of the cities of the Decapolis. The capital of the Roman province of Perea, controlled by Herod Antipas. Gadara, also called Gergasa or Gerasa. When you look at the ancient manuscripts of the New Testament, you find it spelled these different ways. And scholars are not certain what the original document had, but one of those spellings was deemed to be correct. And part of the problem is that the D sound and the R sound in Hebrew are letters that look almost identical, the D and the R. So Gadara, Gerasa, you've got very similar looking words in Hebrew, and then it gets transliterated into Greek. Located on the summit of a mountain about 6 miles southeast of the Sea of Galilee. The miracle could not have taken place at Gadara itself, or between Gadara, which is mentioned in the Gospels, only in connection with the healing of the demon-possessed man was dominant enough to give its name to the entire area. So, from the city known as Gadara, you can't rush headlong down because there's a huge cliff. But the entire region there was known as Gadara, or Gerasa. And there is just outside of the city, a little ways, there are grazing grounds where evidently these pigs were being heard it.
Would it have perhaps been a bigger body of water?
We're just looking at the south end of the Sea of Galilee here. It extends way up in here. Okay.
I mean, elevation wise, they ran down to
Yeah.
the sea and there's quite a bit
Okay.
of flat land.
Here you see same region. Okay, steep cliffs leading down to the Sea of Galilee from Gadara, Gergasa. And it does level out here.
Yeah.
But in much of the area around to the north and the south, you don't have the ability to come down, okay? We're there. Okay. There's a Byzantine monastery, and you have some notes about that here. I'm not going to go over that part with you. It's not that significant to us, but it was an interesting discovery. But the Byzantines, remember, are from the 4th century on. These are the Christian Roman rulers of the area that come after Constantine. Then a chapel was excavated actually in 1980. It's point number 5 on the hill overlooking that monastery. And that was another interesting discovery. We're probably not going to visit either of those sites, however. But what we will visit is one of my favorite vantage points in all of Israel, which is Mount Arbel. Arbel is a high, prominent cliff overlooking the Sea of Galilee. And we're now looking at point 13 on your notes, located northwest of Tiberias and to the west of Magdala. This is actually from the eastern side. If you were to go through this gorge, you would end up down at the Sea of Galilee. If you imagine standing on the pathway looking at this, behind you would be Nazareth. Okay? So in front of you to the east, Sea of Galilee, behind you to the west, Nazareth, and farther west, eventually, the Mediterranean. And you can see these steep cliffs. Okay? Mount Arbel is over here on the right-hand side. This would have been the very path that Jesus walked as he traveled from Nazareth to Capernaum. Right here. Mount Arbel is an imposing mountain, honeycombed with caves up on both sides of this. There are caves that were actually used in the century before Christ by Jews who were hiding out from Herod. And it's quite a gruesome tale recorded by Josephus. Herod lowered his men in cages by ropes down the sides to fire their bows into these caves and kill the Jews that were hiding out. This is what you have partially recorded here. Number 3, there was a battle fought between the Hasmoneans and the Maccabees, recorded in 1 Maccabees 9:2. But number 4, Herod fought the Zealots who hid in the caves above the plain. And if you want to read about that, it's found in Josephus' Antiquities, book 14, and paragraph 445. After the destruction of the temple, this mount was the seat of the priestly family of Yeshua. So Yeshua is the same as the Hebrew name of the Savior, but this was a different Yeshua than our Lord. So here's the valley below. This is we'll be right up here, by the way. Okay. If you want to go out here on the very edge and look down over, be careful. The Sea of Galilee is right around the right side of this.
We came down just one time, we had an earthquake.
Oh, really? Okay. All right. So, beautiful, beautiful view from up here on top of Mount Arbel. You can look to the north, the south, the east, and the west, and if it's a clear day, you can see just as far as you want. If it's a clear day. They don't have a lot of trouble with smog, but they do have problems with dust. And so you get sand, while sand kicks up in the air, sometimes obscuring the vision. But oftentimes it's as clear as you could wish, and you can just see almost forever. And one of my favorite spots in all of Israel. Here's another picture. Some of our students. There's Tom Meyer right there. And their son David when he had long hair. And here's that same cliff you're looking at. Recognize the same shape. Okay. So we're up here in the north part of Israel. As I said before, the north part of Israel reminds me a lot of Northern California. Very green, lots of water. And one of the places where you have an abundance of water is up at Tel Dan. Tel Dan is the actual Tel, but around Dan there is a preserve. And nice walking trails. The water that you're seeing here is coming from Dan Spring. It's one of many, many springs that form around the base of Mount Hermon. Eventually, these all converge to form the headwaters of the Jordan River. But right here, this water is just kind of gushing up out of the ground. And it's beautiful, beautiful. Look at all the lush greenery. It's thick. I mean, you could just hang out there forever and enjoy yourself. We'll get a chance to walk down a pretty good stretch of this nature preserve, and we'll end up at the other end, city of Dan, that is recorded in the Bible. Look at how much water there is. It's just incredible. You don't think of that kind of water as existing in Israel, but it is there. And we're going to come then to the ancient city of Dan. And Dan was one of the locations that Jeroboam chose for his cultic site. Okay, so up in Dan was the northern site, then further south by Bethel was the southern site. This was because he feared that once he separated from Judah, that his people would want to go and worship in Jerusalem, because that's where the temple was, and that he would lose their dedication. Golden calves in Dan and Bethel. Here is Dan. It was the cult center of Jeroboam I. And this is the high place where that altar once stood. You can see the stairs on the left-hand side there. In here. Led up to the top of the platform of this religious center. The platform is made out of hewn limestone blocks. We're talking about limestone throughout most of Israel. Very easy to carve, cut, make blocks out of. Much easier than the basalt that we had at Korazin. In the lower left portion of the image is a portion of the northern wall that enclosed the area where a large sacrificial altar. These are the kinds of things we don't usually see in America, but all over Israel we see these types of sacrificial altars. So coming back to your notes here, Dan, located far to the north. Again, we have that expression from Dan to Beersheba, talking about the entire extent of the Holy Land. Dan, the furthest north, that is built in the Old Testament. Now, the actual geographic boundaries of the land grant given to Abraham extend further north, way up into modern-day Lebanon, and even into Syria, where you have the Euphrates River cutting across. That will be the northern boundary of the land grant given to Abraham. Israel has never possessed all of that. In biblical times, Dan was the furthest north. Number two, as the northernmost city in Israel, the name of the city, together with Beersheba in the south, defined as the borders of the land of Dan to Beersheba. You find that in, among other places, in Judges chapter 20, verse 1. Tel Dan was the site of many important cities from Canaanite times, notice between 2700 and 2400 BC. This is going way back, yes?
So why do you think that Jeroboam chose to put a high place at Dan of all places, which is not very centrally located, right? It's as far north as you can get in Israel. Why there?
Okay, so he could have done one in the center of his kingdom, and that might have made more sense. But remember, we're in ancient times; it's difficult to get around.
Right.
So he put one in the north and one in the south.
Even so, it seems like somewhere just west of the Sea of Galilee would have made a little more sense.
It might have been. It might have been, but this is what he chose. Maybe he had visions in his mind of extending further north into the land grant given to Abraham. I don't know. I don't know. That's a good question. But these are the two sites that he chose.
Why did he choose the golden calf? Was he rebelling against God?
Probably. Remember that Jeroboam's violation of of the commandments was a violation of the second commandment, not the first commandment. So he was using the golden calf to worship Yahweh, God, and one true God, but he was using an image to do it. So he was violating the commandments. Later, it's under other kings, you have polytheism coming in, especially Baal worship and Ashtaroth coming in. But at the time of Jeroboam, it is still the worship of the God of Israel, but they're using an idol to do it. So the idea of the golden calf, going back to Aaron, of course. So the fact there were two of them doesn't mean that they believed in two gods. It was the same God at both locations. It was just two places, so as people can choose to go either to one or the other of those locations and worship there instead of going to Jerusalem to worship. But why the golden calf? Again, that was a common theme. We find that in the Exodus as well. Okay, so point number 4, springs in the area produce abundant amounts of water. Okay, we saw pictures of that. Primary source for the upper Jordan River. The springs are fed by snow and rain fall on Mount Hermon. Water seeps into the mountain, dividing into hundreds of springs by the time it reaches the foot. Together, these springs form the largest karstic spring in the Middle East. The karstic, again, having to do with these cavities that are formed within limestone. As limestone dissolves in the water, it forms these cavities. Water collects. Geological forces then force the water back up out of the ground to get these springs. Together, these springs form the largest karstic spring in the Middle East. The powerful spring provides up to 62,872 million gallons of water annually. This is about 22.5 gallons of water per second. So that's and in the Middle East, this is astounding. This is truly astounding. So again, in the first lecture, we talked about that Fertile Crescent. So where the water flows, Tigris and Euphrates, Jordan River, the Nile River, this is where civilization develops, because you've got to have water to have civilization. And even today, in the fiercely divided Middle Eastern climate, you find Israel getting together with Jordan and even with the Lebanese to make agreements over water. So this doesn't always get publicized. Oftentimes it's done kind of behind the scenes, but they will join hands. They will make agreements with each other for the sake of water. During the Canaanite period, point number 5, the city was known by the name Leshem. You find that in Joshua 1947, or Laish, also in Judges 18:29. Canaanite Laish was conquered and settled by the tribe of Dan. We talked about this in that first lecture when we were talking about the tribal allotments. Remember that Dan was given an allotment down by Jaffa, but they were unable to conquer the Canaanites who lived down there. So they eventually wandered northward. They found this place at Laish. They conquered the Canaanites living there, and there they settled. So even though in the book of Joshua, Dan is given an allotment in a totally different part of Israel, this is what gets known as Dan. And we have that recorded in the book of Judges. Judges 18:29. Number 7, a cultic center at Dan existed in the time of the judges, and the children of Dan set up for themselves a graven image. Judges 18:30, violation of the second commandment, but not the first. The high place exposed at Dan was established by Jeroboam I, king of Israel, at the end of the 10th century BC, after the division of the kingdom. Jeroboam I built altars bearing a golden calf. He set one in Bethel, the other he put in Dan, and the people went up to worship even unto Dan. That's 1 Kings chapter 12, verses 29 and 30. Discussing that. The high place of Dan, here, what we're looking at on this slide, was destroyed when the city was captured by Tiglath-Pileser, the king of Assyria, in 732 BC, as he came in to carry away the northern tribes of Israel. Soon thereafter, it was restored, but never regained its former importance. Now, one of the fascinating finds from Dan, discovered as recently as 1993, is a piece of fossilized tablet from the second half of the 9th century BC. Carved into it is an inscription of an Aramaic king, believed to be either Hazael or Ben-Hadad, the king of Damascus, boasting of his victory over the king of Israel, the house of David. It's one of the very few extra biblical references that we have to the house of David. This was discovered just in 1993. First time that the name House of David was discovered outside of the Bible. Now we'll talk about a similar discovery over at Megiddo that doesn't use the expression House of David, but has a symbol of the House of David discovered at Megiddo. So there are a lot of exciting things coming to light, actually just in the last 5 or 10 years from the excavations in Jerusalem itself. And I'm excited about the fact that it looks like we're going to be able to participate one of the days of our tour in the sifting project in Jerusalem, sifting through the Temple Mount sifting project. So maybe one of us will get to discover something important, fascinating, famous, and maybe not. We'll get a lot of dirt.
It'd be fun if we can find anything good.
Okay, but this is what's left of that high place where the golden calf was. Now, as we move out across, going really coming back down towards the Sea of Galilee and moving out towards the Mediterranean, one of the most important Old Testament cities is this one, pronounced Chatzor. Most people say Hazor. Chatzor, and there's a tell there. This is a great picture of what a tell looks like. Sides, flat across the top. It was built over years and years and years. One civilization built, destroyed, a second civilization built on top of it. Destroyed, another civilization built on top of that. So just like a stack of pancakes, if you will. And then archaeologists can come and dig down through that tell, and the deeper they get, the more ancient they get. And so many civilizations can be discovered by digging through a tell. Many places in Israel that have the name Tel in it. There's Tel Chatzor. We already talked about Tel Aviv. Tel Aviv is a tell, it's an archaeological tell. Notice Mount Hermon in the back, top of it. Okay, so we're still in the north part of Israel. The citadel of the tell, one of Solomon's chariot cities. Oh, I was going to get on this, and I did. I'll bring you next week a list of the chariot cities of Solomon. Solomon, during his reign, established throughout Israel probably as many as 6 or 7 chariot cities. We know the location of 3 of them for certain. And these were major cities where he would have chariots and horses stored and ready in case of an enemy invasion. They could go out from these locations. So Megiddo was another important chariot city. But here at Chatzor, Solomon had a chariot city. On top of the citadel is a lone tree left the center here. It's in the distance. So if you're looking at your notes, number 15, Chatzor, southwest of Dan, north of the Sea of Galilee, and again, kind of over west a little ways, going on your way towards the Mediterranean. Located on a ridge 9.5 miles north of the Sea of Galilee, overlooking the swampy Hula Valley. So a question came up earlier about mosquitoes and so forth, malaria. If you look on most of your Bible maps, you see north of the Sea of Galilee, another little sea called the Hula Sea. It was never a sea or a lake, it was a swamp. In the 1950s, Israel went in and they drained that swamp, channeling the water into fish ponds and planting eucalyptus trees to dry up the swamp. Okay, so it was close to the Hula Valley. Number 2, the largest tell in Israel. covering a total of 205 acres, and those 21 layers of cities. So that's city after city after city, civilization after civilization after civilization. Each one of those layers lasting for a different period of time, for a lengthy period of time. What led to their destruction? Various things. Sometimes enemy invasion. The city was conquered. Set fire, destroyed. Other times, perhaps, an earthquake destroys the city. Lies now rubble. So, no D8 cat to come and clear the rubble away. You just build on top of the old rubble. And so these towns get built up over time. There are actually two cities at Hatzor. I'm going on to page 14. The upper city is the smaller, but it covers 30 acres and 21 strata of civilizations. That's the most remarkable one. The lower city is actually broader, wider, but containing only 5 strata of civilizations. Not a mean pal at all. But so we talk about the upper city and the lower city of Hatzor. We will visit Hatzor. It's an amazing. The excavations you can see going back to Canaanite times, pre-Israelite times, before the Israelites entered the Promised Land, and then on up into Israelite times, and see a lot of stuff there. Hatzor was located on the Via Maris, that major north-south route that goes along the side of the Mediterranean Sea. Via Maris simply means the way by the sea. So this is the major route along the Mediterranean. The King's Highway further inland, going north and south, also on the east side of the Jordan River. And then there are various lateral connections between those. Number 4 was a Canaanite royal city, okay, and in pre-Israelite times, and the leader of the Northern Confederacy against Joshua. So we read about this in the early days of Joshua's conquest, Joshua chapter 11. Joshua moves in, his armies are conquering the cities, the Canaanites are getting worried, and they formed an alliance. The king of Hatzor was a very important leader of that alliance against Joshua. He lost out. It was destroyed by Joshua, Joshua chapter 11. The Canaanite city oppressed Israel after the judgeship of Ehud. Okay, Ehud was the left-handed judge. You remember he gave it to Eglon. But after those days, Hatzor oppressed Israel for a while. The city was taken by Barak in Judges chapter 4. The army of Hatzor was led by Sisera, 1 Samuel 12. It was one of 3 key chariot cities fortified by Solomon. So again, as I mentioned, there are 3 of them, 3 of these chariot cities that we can locate and identify for certain. There were other chariot cities, perhaps a half a dozen, or maybe 7 chariot cities in all, scattered throughout Israel to fortify the nation in the days of Solomon. There is a water tunnel. Many of these cities have remarkable water tunnels. As we said, you cannot have a place to live unless you have a reliable water source. So we talked about Caesarea, where Herod the Great built this big aqueduct to bring water from far off. Oftentimes, instead, what we find is some kind of a tunnel dug down going to the location of a spring. And there's a remarkable one here, about 82 feet long. This is part of the water system that was built by King Ahaz. Hatzor was destroyed by Tiglath-Pileser III in 732 BC. And then in 144 BC, intertestamental period, it was taken by Jonathan Maccabee after defeating the army of Demetrius II. That's the basic story of Hatzor. Again, very ancient city going way back to Canaanite times, pre-Israelite. Lots and lots of levels to be excavated there. A very, very obvious tell. Skip over talking about Sephiroth. Before we get to Sephiroth, here's an altar, the sacrifice on top of the altar. A huge ashlar altar that was found on the lower part of Hatzor. Stone originally may have been used in the Middle Bronze Age building. Final usage, it functioned as an altar. So quite a lot of stones going into secondary or even tertiary usage. Originally used for one thing, construction. Oh, here's a good building stone. Let's use it for something else. sometimes it complicates the archaeology, trying to date something, because you have stones used in multiple periods. Here's the entrance to the water tunnel at Hatzor. Steps going down. Obviously, the handrails are not original. Okay. Now, Sepphoris, fascinating place. I doubt we'll have time to visit Sepphoris unless we get a little change in itinerary. It's a remarkable place because of the mosaics there. They're later than biblical times. But Sepphoris was a important village in the area in the New Testament times. It's very close to Nazareth. We'll spend some time talking about Nazareth. But the tradition states that Mary's family was actually from Sepphoris, and that Joseph from Nazareth maybe was doing some carpentry work in Sepphoris when the two of them met. But this is Sepphoris. Here's some of the beautiful mosaics that are discovered there. It was obviously a place where very, very wealthy people lived. And we'll find these magnificent big houses, big government buildings, lots and lots of mosaics. This mosaic shows festivity in Egypt when the Nile reached its peak, the lighthouse from Alexandria, the photos. So a lot of these animals, this is showing the Nile and the instrument to measure the height of the Nile at the floods and so forth. This is known as the Mona Lisa of the Galilee, discovered there in Sepphoris. Beautiful mosaic of a woman, somewhat reminiscent, I guess, of the Mona Lisa. Now I want to come to Nazareth.
One quick question.
Yeah.
Sepphoris is not the same as Suffolk.
No, not the same as Suffolk, but Sepphoris. Sometimes you see it spelled with two P's. Or a PH, not the same as Suffolk. Now, we're very familiar with Nazareth from our Bibles, of course. This is the place where the angel appears to both Joseph, annunciations about the birth of Christ. Of course, Christ is born in Bethlehem, but later, after they return from Egypt, because Archelaus is ruling in the south, Joseph, fearing Archelaus, goes back up to Nazareth. This is where Jesus was raised as a boy. What we're looking at here is an aerial view of Nazareth, and it's a huge place. It is one of the larger cities in all of Israel. And in fact, there's both a lower city and an upper city of Nazareth, as we'll see. But this is a huge place because of Jesus. Jesus transformed Nazareth from an unknown village to this enormous city. Here is, there are so many churches in Nazareth, but this is one of the most prominent, the Church of the Annunciation, known by this very unique conical-shaped dome on it. Here in the Church of the Annunciation, below the church, sacred grotto associated with the Annunciation of the angel Gabriel to the Virgin Mary. Unfortunately, over all these places that are biblical significance, they had to come and build these shrines, so that you can't see what it looked like when the Bible is actually occurring. But there are lots and lots of places where we can see what the lay of the land is like. But these shrines are built over everything. Go on many tours of Israel, especially those that they're influenced by the Catholic Church. You're constantly hearing about holy sites. And the origin of this is in the Middle Ages, when the Catholic Church developed the idea that in response to a priest's requirement to do penance, you could visit a holy site and say certain prayers. So the belief was that in certain places your prayers were more powerful, especially if it was a place where a saint died or a saint was born. There was believed to be more potent prayers. So the whole idea of pilgrimage is tied in with visiting holy sites coming from Catholic theology. And it's for that reason that I refuse to call our tours a pilgrimage. A lot of people talk about going on pilgrimage to the Holy Land. And if you want to call it a pilgrimage, that's fine. You know, let it mean whatever it means to you. But as far as I'm concerned, it's not a pilgrimage. This is an educational tour. It's designed to help us become more informed about the Bible, the Word of God. We become better acquainted with God and His ways and where these events happened in the Bible. Jesus told the woman at the well that the days are coming and now is when men will not worship either in this place, Gerizim, nor in Jerusalem, but the true worshipers will worship God in spirit and in truth. And the fact of the matter is that room 101 at Shasta Bible College is just as holy as Nazareth, just as holy as the Temple Mount, or the Western Wall, or any other place. Your body is the temple of the Holy Spirit. It's in you, and you have a God, you're not your own. But you're bought with a price. Therefore, glorify God in your body and your spirit, which are God's. Nevertheless, we are looking at what has become of this place where traditionally the angel appeared to Mary. And did it actually happen on the spot? Well, your guess is as good as mine, but if it wasn't here, it was very close to here, okay? But we really don't know with 100% certainty about many of the locations in the Holy Land. What we can say is it was very close. For this reason, for me, what I prefer to see is the lay of the land. I want to see the geography, where things are in relationship to each other. I don't care so much about these altars, these shrines, these things that are built up by men. But they are here, they're intended to remind people that this is where a significant event happened. So if we let our minds focus not so much on what is built up here, but what this represents, and to remember that the angel Gabriel made an amazing annunciation to a young Hebrew girl. You are going to bear the Messiah. What Hebrew girls for generations and generations hoped for, longed for, came to pass either in this exact place or somewhere very close by. It happened. We can remember that. We can reflect upon it. We can look around and we can see, yeah, this is the place. This is Nazareth. This is where all this is happening. Okay. This is the main altar in the grotto, and the words inscribed on it, not clearly visible. Stated in Latin here, the Word was made flesh. Now, somebody's thinking, wait a minute, wasn't that Bethlehem? Remember, the miracle was not in the birth. Even though we talk about the virgin's birth, and it was a virgin birth, the miracle was the conception of Christ. There was actually nothing quite that miraculous about the way Christ was born. Now, Radbertus, a monk from the Middle Ages, taught that Christ emerged mystically, supernaturally, through the abdominal wall of Mary, so that he did not break the birth canal. And it was Radbertus who popularized the idea of a virgin birth. But the miracle that occurred was actually in the conception, which did take place in Nazareth. This is where the humanity of our Lord began forming. So this statement is correct. Here, the Word was made flesh. Okay? May be developed and grew, and in the sovereign plan and the purposes of God, Joseph and Mary were led to Bethlehem, where Christ was born, a natural birth, but in fulfillment of the prophecy of Micah 5, verse 2. All right. What else have we got here? Here's Mary's well. One of two possible water sources of strange in Nazareth. Now, let's talk about the water sources in Nazareth. Go back to your notes here. Let's look at point number 1. Nazareth, located inside a bowl atop the Nazareth Ridge, north of the Jezreel Valley. I talked about that Jezreel Valley in the first lecture. So you have Mount Carmel jutting out into the Mediterranean, and to its east, this kind of almost triangular-shaped valley called the Jezreel Valley. On the east side of the Jezreel Valley, then, we have these rising mountains. And the hills of Galilee. And up here in the hills of Galilee, up on top in a bowl-shaped region, you have Nazareth. That's what we're saying here, point number 1. In a bowl atop the Nazareth Ridge, north of the Jezreel Valley, among the most southern limestone hills of the Lebanon Range, it runs approximately from south-southwest to north-northeast. To the south, there's a sharp drop down to the Jezreel Valley. By the way, Jezreel Valley, also known as the plain of Esdraelon. So we've actually got 3 names for this valley. Jezreel Valley, Esdraelon, and then the Valley of Armageddon. The 3 names of that valley. The Jezreel Valley is the one that goes by most commonly. The base of the valley is 1,214 feet above sea level. Steep hills rise up the north and east sides, while on the west side they reach up to 1,640 feet and command an impressive view. When we visit Nazareth, we will go and visit this site overlooking the Jezreel Valley, called the Brow of Nazareth. And it's another remarkable view. It's not quite as fantastic as looking from Mount Arbel, but it's almost. And the neat thing is you're looking at a different part of Israel, looking westward towards the Mediterranean, right across the Jezreel Valley to Megiddo, and in between it's all this Jezreel Valley. It's wonderful. Tradition has it that from that Brow of Nazareth was where Jesus was taken after his sermon in the Nazareth synagogue, and they were going to throw him down over the cliff. Whether that was the actual cliff or not, again, hard to say. But, and there are some arguments against that I think are probably legitimate arguments, but it does give you a sense of where Jesus was when that event actually did take place. So, number 2, the mild climate of the valley causes wildflowers and fruit flourish. Now, notice point number 3, and this is on the review questions. It existed since Canaanite period. Okay, so Nazareth has been around since that time, but although that is true, it is not mentioned one time in the Old Testament. So it was around. In fact, it's not mentioned in the Old Testament. It's part of our reason for believing it was not a significant city at all. Just a very insignificant village. Neither is it mentioned at all in the Apocrypha or in Josephus. No mention of Nazareth at all. Not even mentioned in the Talmud, although there is one rabbinic source which mentions that Nazareth was a village inhabited by priests. It's about one of the only extra-biblical sources from antiquity about Nazareth. At the time of Christ, it was a small village, and probably the best estimate, it's only an estimate, is that probably fewer than 200 people lived in Nazareth. So that first aerial photo that we had of Nazareth showing big, bustling city covering all this area in New Testament times, Joseph and Mary there, just probably less than 200 people. I mean, it's a dinky thing. So judged by the rock tombs, the early town was higher up the west hill than the present Nazareth. Now, talk about water supplies. Point number 6. There are 2 possible water supplies. The first, which is the larger, lies in the valley and has been called Mary's Well. That's what we're looking at here. Once again, it didn't look like this in the first century. This is what's been built up over it again. It's a holy place because Mary visited there, and the place that Mary visited becomes a holy place in Catholic theology. It's been called Mary's Well since AD 1100. Now think about that for a minute. Since 1100 AD, it's been known as Mary's Well. So is this Mary's Well? 1,100 years is a long time. And so was there anybody living in 1,100 that knew Mary? Well, of course not. Okay. Like with a lot of locations in the land of Israel, we're relying on traditions. Now, is there truth to some of the traditions? No doubt. Are they all absolutely true? Almost certainly not. Okay. Most of the places identified throughout the land of Israel, especially in the region of Jerusalem, were identified by Constantine's mother. And this is where now we're talking, in the 300s. So we're still a couple of hundred years after the events. So Constantine's mother comes along, she says, I want to know where this is. And the local people say, oh, well, it's here, of course. And she said, well, I want to know where that is. And they said, well, it was over here, of course. So these places get located, shrines get built, and the names perpetuate over the years, and that's what we have today. A couple hundred years. Our nation has been around for a couple of hundred years. So think about it today, where the Battle of Lexington occurred. And you were out there in that general region, you asked some local person, well, where did the Battle of Lexington take place? Well, how somebody today would know if it hasn't been previously identified? So we want to be careful about these. Now, are we in Nazareth? Yes, we are in Nazareth. Was there a well in Nazareth in Mary's day? Of course there was. Was this it? Very possibly. Very possibly. Are we 100% certain? No.
Were the Muslims in charge during the time?
Yeah, in 1100, well, actually, at this point in time, AD 1100, we have had Crusaders in charge at this point. Okay, there's 1,000 right in there is the Kingdom of Jerusalem. So, again, we've got this ping pong ball situation. You've got Christians, you've got Romans, you've got Christians, you've got Muslims, you've got Crusaders, you've got Muslims, you've got Crusaders, you've got Seljuk Turks, you've got Ottomans, and it goes back and forth and back and forth. So that's another part of the confusion. Yeah. Okay, two possible water supplies still, point number 6. The first of which is the larger, lies in the valley that has been called Mary's Well since 1100, but there's no trace of early dwellings nearby. So that's the main problem with this. No trace, archaeologically, of dwellings nearby this location from the 1st century. The second is a very small fountain called the New Well, and that may be a misnomer, because it may actually be older. It's called the New Well because it was discovered more recently in an angle formed by projection of the western hill. The Byzantine church and town lay closer to this. So what you do find is often the case, you find different groups competing for the genuine site. So one group says, no, we've got the real church. Another group says, no, we've got the real church. And it's a contest. Okay, Nazareth, point number 7, was the home of Joseph, Mary, and Jesus, which we all know. John 1:45-46. Can any good thing come out of Nazareth? Okay. Nazareth was a city of disrepute. It was just a podunk place. Nobody expected a prophet to come out of Nazareth. We'll go to this in number 9, Christ returned to Nazareth on at least 2 occasions, and those are recorded in the scriptures, Luke 4 and Matthew 13, parallel to Matthew 13, found in Mark 6. The steep scarp called Jebel Kafsa, now that's the Arabic name, Jebel Kafsa, overlooking the plain, is traditionally called the Mount of Precipitation. That's the hill that I was talking about. It's traditionally the site where they were going to cast Christ down over the edge. Now, notice it says in your notes that this is unlikely to be authentic since it was not the hill on which their city was built, to the best of our knowledge. So even though it may not be the actual place, it does give you a good sense of whatever that brow of Nazareth was, where they took Jesus. What we're looking at here, you can see a big map. Here's the Mediterranean, here's the city, here's the land of Israel. So here's Hatzor, which we're talking about. There's Megiddo. Nazareth is kind of in between these two, right across from Megiddo over in here. I can't quite point it out because it's the scale not good for that. But you can see the Acheology right where the dot is there. Today, point number 11, Nazareth is home to more than 60,000 Israeli Arabs. Nazareth is not West Bank. Nazareth is Israel. And the Arabs who live in Nazareth are Israeli citizens. Israeli Arabs living there. And actually, and this is in the notes, but just in the last 5 years, there has been a movement among these Israeli Arabs to say, we are not Arabs, but instead, we are Aramaic. They're identifying with the ancient Christians who used to live there before the Arabs came in and dominated the land. And this group is very loyal to the nation of Israel. Now, they're a small group. They're trying to have a greater influence. And if you think about them, you might pray for them because they've come under intense persecution from the Palestinians. But their leader is a priest in one of the churches in Nazareth itself. And there's been a number of very interesting articles written about him and his movement focused there in Nazareth. So that's kind of a footnote, I guess, we might add to point number 11 here. Home to more than 60,000 Israeli Arabs. Upper Nazareth is home to thousands more Jewish residents. Now, so you have these two Nazareths. Upper Nazareth is much newer. It's a fairly new Israeli city, a Jewish city. It's right outside of Lower Nazareth. So point A, the majority of Nazarenes are Palestinian Arabs, about 35 to 40% of which are Christians. The rest are Muslims. That figure is a little bit outdated. I don't have fresh figures for you, but there are problems for Christians in Palestinian-dominated areas. The most severely affected area is Bethlehem. We'll talk about that when we get to Bethlehem. Bethlehem used to be predominantly Christian. Today, Christians in Bethlehem form a tiny minority. It's a very sad thing indeed. Point B, the Israeli government built a new city since the 1950s called Nazareth Elite, which means Upper Nazareth, and populated it with a Jewish majority. Okay, here are the churches in Nazareth. Point number 12. You've got first the Basilica of the Annunciation. That's the one we saw with the pointy dome on top of it. What is there today is a Byzantine church built in 427, then rebuilt by the Crusaders. The Crusaders come along roughly about 1000 AD. The present church built in 1955, and then added to, rebuilt, decorated, and so forth in 1969, which is now the largest church in the Middle East, Church of the Annunciation. Then there's another church in Nazareth called the Basilica of Jesus the Youth, probably built around the place where Joseph and Mary had their home after they returned from Egypt. Third, the Chapel of Our Lady of the Fright. Mary was greatly afraid when the angel announced to her what was going to happen to her. So you have the Our Lady of the Fright. Then, of course, Mary's well, which we saw a picture of that. Traditionally, where Gabriel spoke to Mary. And it goes on. Then, St. Gabriel's Church. Sixth, then Sacristy. Then St. Joseph's Church or the Carpenter Shop. Then the Greek Catholic Synagogue Church, built in the 6th century, and the Ladies of Nazareth Convent. These churches, and then quite a number of smaller churches also in the area. There are some evangelical house churches, of course, in various places. But Nazareth is a place with lots and lots of churches. Okay, now, let's spend a little bit of time talking about Megiddo, one of the most fascinating places. And so important is Armageddon that newspapers reserve their largest headline for what is called the Armageddon headline. Okay, and that's coming right out of Irvine, the Battle of Armageddon. Well, as we think about a map of the Middle East, and we think about the location of Armageddon, or Tel Megiddo, Megiddo is important chiefly because it lies at the major crossroads of multiple civilizations. First of all, when we think about Abram, who comes out of Ur of the Chaldeans. From Ur, he travels to Haran, which is up here, the north part of this Mesopotamian area. Okay, here's the Euphrates, here's the Tigris, between rivers, Mesos, Ptolemais, Mesopotamia, is this whole region, which is modern-day Iraq, which consisted of Babylon in the south and Assyria in the north. So Abram comes out of Ur of the Chaldeans with his dad and some other members of the family and settled in Haran on their way to the land of Canaan. After spending some time in Haran and the death of Abram's father, they come down into the land of Canaan, and eventually Abram goes to Egypt. And the route he followed would have been this route. Okay? That roughly follows the main trade route, except for this detour right here. The main trade route from Ur to Egypt was like this. Okay, so that was a major trade route in the day. Similarly, if you're going from Egypt either to Ur or up here into Antalya or over here at the Caspian Sea, you would come up this direction, and these two trade routes then, of course, meet right here. You can see Megiddo. Not only that, but if you were coming up from the Red Sea, having traded down in Africa or in the Arabian Peninsula, there are the port here, Eilat. You would come up, there was another trade route coming straight this way for spices and so forth. That came right through Megiddo, and then from here, south from, this is Antalya, modern-day Turkey. Another big route is the Via Maris coming down here along the way of the sea. These four major trade routes all converge in this one spot. And because, again, of the geography of the land, because of Mount Carmel coming in from the sea, forcing this Via Maris now inland, you've got the hills of Galilee, and then down here the hills of Judea, keeping out towards the sea. There's a very narrow passageway that comes right down around the base of what today is Tel Megiddo. This makes this such an important place of military strategy because whoever controls Tel Megiddo controls all the trade routes and the armies traveling back and forth between these areas. So if you control the high ground there, and you've got chariots or soldiers or horsemen in the valley down below you, you have the advantage. So Megiddo is important. There are battles that have been fought down in the Jezreel Valley at the base of Tel Megiddo over the centuries. It is a field that is literally drenched in the blood of many, many different nations. Several of which are recorded in our Bibles, many others are recorded in other historical works outside of the Bible. So we're talking about Tel Megiddo. Let's take a look at what it looks like. It's right in this area, and this is a view of the Tel. So again, remember, we have a Tel, has these sloping sides, flat surface, and you can dig down to the stack of pancakes to find all these different layers of civilization. And here's where a trench has been dug up on top. We find these are all different layers that have been exposed, and you can see buildings, all kinds of things from this aerial photograph. It gives you a good idea of what a Tel looks like. The civilizations go back into pre-Israelite times. This is an ancient Canaanite altar, and for you have a victim lying here. This is someone who crawled up there on that altar. You can see what a large altar it was. Okay, some altars were fairly small, just big enough to put on, maybe a small lamp or something on. But this was obviously a large, very important altar, received many, many sacrifices for a fairly large dwelling place. Okay, come here to point number one. Megiddo is located on the lower slope of Mount Carmel. So if you were to take Carmel, which goes from northeast to southwest, and follow it into its end of it, you have then this little hump. And that's Megiddo. Okay. Now, originally it may have been on the valley floor, But civilization after civilization after civilization built it up to where it almost looks like it's an extension of Mount Carmel. So that's what we're talking about here. The town has about, notice, 30 strata of civilizations. So you start digging down through that stack of pancakes, 30 different levels, representing a long period of time. Now, look at the water tunnel we have in Megiddo. We talked about the Hutzler water tunnel. In Megiddo, the water tunnel is 210 feet long. We'll go through that tunnel. And it's quite an interesting walk. You won't get wet in that one. There's a walkway you can go on, and we get to the end and we go up out some steps and far end of it. But that's it. Now, here's something. Unlike Nazareth, Megiddo was a large and very important city, and it is recorded in numerous extra biblical sources. But even outside of the Bible, ancient Egyptian records record the campaigns of Tutmosis III, Amenhotep II, and it's also mentioned in the Amarna letters. So we have many references to Megiddo in many different sources. The biblical references are all listed for you there under point number 5. When the Israelites entered the promised land under General Joshua, the king of Megiddo was killed by Joshua, Joshua chapter 12. This region was given to the tribe of Manasseh, or Manasseh, as it's pronounced in Hebrew. The Canaanites retained control of it, however. So even though it was given to Manasseh, the Manassites were not able to occupy it. The Canaanites retained control. It was involved in the defeat of Sisera, Judges chapter 5. It was part of the 5th Solomonic district. By Solomon's days, Israel has full control of this area. And Megiddo becomes one of the most important Solomon's chariot cities. When we're at Megiddo, we will see the places where Solomon's horses probably were tied up. We'll see the feeding troughs that Solomon used. And there's a large grain silo there that we think, of course, we're trying to figure out what these things represented in ancient times, but we think the large grain silo was there in order to feed the horses in wintertime, store enough grain to feed that large store of horses. So it was one of 3 fortified chariot cities. Ahaziah died in the valley after being smitten by Jehu, 2 Kings 9:27. That's associated with this city. Josiah was killed by Pharaoh Necho, right close to Megiddo. And it's associated with the final apocalyptic battle, Revelation chapter 16. As we explained before, in Revelation, we have this valley called the Valley of Har, mountain, Megiddo. So it's a mountain, not because it's a literal mountain, it's a tell. So it's the mountain of Megiddo. So the valley, the Jezreel Valley, called the Valley of the Mountain of Megiddo, the Valley of Armageddon. Now, the Valley of Armageddon is not where the actual battle takes place. And if you read Revelation carefully, what you find is the kings assemble themselves in the valley. From there they go, and the major battle is probably fought just outside of Jerusalem. Very likely from Jerusalem on south of the Dead Sea, down to the region of Bosra, down by Petra. That whole region is going to be the scene of this final campaign of Armageddon, a lengthy campaign that will last several days. We all oftentimes refer to it as the Battle of Armageddon. Many people think that it's just going to be, Christ comes and boom, it's over like that. But it'll be an extended battle. The battle is described in a number of places in the Testament prophets. You have quite a description in the 110th Psalm of this final battle that's fought between the Messiah and these armies that are assembled against the Lord. Psalm 2 talks about the armies that are gathered together against the Lord in anointed reference to the Battle of Armageddon. But it's called Armageddon only in the book of Revelation. Megiddo is the name of the city, it's a town, it's a mound, it's a mountain. Okay, any questions about Megiddo? cover all the points on our review sheet. Yep. Okay. I want to get to Jerusalem, but first I want to just mention a couple of other places. Bet Shan is a wonderful place to visit. Oh, here's the water system at Megiddo. That doesn't look like a place you want to go when you're thirsty. This was on a low point in the water table, kind of like right now, after a period of drought, and the water table is very, very low. But the water does collect here at the end, and then sometimes the water is way up, much higher, around this level. There's the tunnel going down to the water system, and you can see we can walk on a nice walkway with handrails. In ancient times,
Are there lights in the tunnel?
there are, I'm trying to remember if there are lights in this one.
Yeah,
I don't think there are. You can take flashlights. See, in ancient times, there were actually niches cut to the side, like right here, lighting oil lamps. Okay. I don't think there are electric lights in this one. But this is the point. This is as ancient as the Bible right here. You go down here, you touch those walls, and you're touching ancient walls that are carved out by hand. When we're in Hezekiah's tunnel, we'll talk about in a few moments, you can see the pick marks inside of the tunnel made by Hezekiah's men. And it's a thrill, I'll tell you. There are a lot of places, like I said, that we can't identify exactly, but there are many places like this, like Hezekiah's tunnel, the Sea of Galilee, that, I mean, it's as authentic as your Bible. That's it. You're there. You're looking at the actual pick marks made by the men that we read about in the Bible, and that is a thrill. At the end, we go down these stairs down to the water table. Here's that grain silo I was talking you about. This is actually a big, you can see at the base of it, it's circular. If you extend this around, the top of it goes all the way around. These are not so much steps, although they look like steps, but probably what happened was there's another set of these steps on the opposite side. And so a plank could be put across here. Okay, and then as the supply was used, you could lower that plank down these steps that you can get out there and scoop out your grain in your bucket and then carry it back up.
Smart.
Yeah. So if you're looking down at the huge grain silo that was found on the side, here's a railway around here. So you're standing up. This may be waist height right here. It's huge. It was dated to the days of the powerful Israelite king Jeroboam. Staircase leading down into the silo, descending from upper left to lower right. Similar staircase on the opposite side of the silo, evidently workers would descend one side, ascend the other. Okay, so you can have traffic. You come down, go across the plank to the other side, get your grain, and then come back up. That's how it works. The silo is 36 feet in diameter and 23 feet deep. It's been calculated that it will hold 588 cubic yards of grain, enough to feed 300 to 350 horses for 130 to 150 days. So again, one of the major chariot cities of King Solomon.
By the way, my understanding of the reason they did so much work on tunnels for the wells,
Yeah.
so that they would have the water and access inside the city walls.
Okay, very important that you mention that. So oftentimes the well itself or the spring was not located where you actually wanted to set it. For whatever reason, contour, the lay of the land, and so on and so forth. So you had to get from your dwelling to the water and then back. Okay, normally that's not too much of a problem. You just build a pathway and you go. The biggest problem comes in time of war. So your enemy comes in, he wants to conquer your city, and so what does he do? He hangs out by your water supply. Eventually you've got to come out to the water source to get water, then he can pick you off. So what you do is you build a tunnel underground that goes out to the water source. So you do that, then what does your enemy do? He comes and he poisons your water source. So a second defensive measure you take is to camouflage the the well or the spring from outside, then have a tunnel coming from inside the city. And this is exactly what we find happen in many of these cities. So yeah, thank you for mentioning that, Dr. It's a very important aspect of these, reason for these tunnels. So this seal is a seal of Jeroboam II that was discovered at Megiddo back in the 1950s. It is the earliest such seal ever found. And it has the symbol of the tribe of Judah on it. And it has the name of the owner of the seal up here, and it is saying that it is from Jeroboam II. It's Paleo-Hebrew script. Unfortunately, the seal was taken to Constantinople to a museum and it has disappeared. Yeah, so it's gone. But there have been many photographs taken of this. Ancient seals from the land of Israel, and it is tremendous evidence of the biblical scenario in the time of Jeroboam. Not Jeroboam the first, the one who was responsible for the splitting of the kingdoms, but the later Jeroboam the second. This was found at Megiddo.
Was it made out of clay or was it bronze?
The original seal was clay. This is bronze. It's a replica made in bronze, and but the original seal was clay.
Yeah.
Okay. I love that Shannon. You'll love it. It's just an incredible setting. The first time I went to Bet Shannon, all of this down here was underground still. Okay. This is the Acropolis of Bet Shannon, which goes back to the Egyptian period, where the Egyptians were in control of this whole region. And over here is the modern city of Bet Shannon. So there's a, right up here, I guess where this is taken from, there's a little restaurant that come down through. But it's a huge city. This was the one major city of the Decapolis that was on the west side of the Jordan River. It was a Greek city. It was the major city of the area. And what has been uncovered here, and we will visit, is just an incredible city. This is the major corridor right here through the city. Off the side, you have a bathhouse, all kinds of buildings, structures. And we can, if you're energetic enough, you can walk up all these stairs. So I guess it's off the Acropolis. And you can see the ancient Egyptian governor's residence up here on top of the Acropolis. It's an amazing place to visit.
Which way would be to the Jordan River on this picture?
Okay, off to the right, kind of off of the corner. Okay. And then the Mediterranean would be up here. So we are south looking north in this picture. Okay, let's come down here. Here's some sheep in the region of Bet Shannon. Huh? Okay. Here's now actually looking at, this is the Greek name, was Scythopolis. Bet Shannon is the Hebrew name. So it's also known as Scythopolis. Here's some of the ancient pillars and buildings, structures. Okay. And then we're going to get to Jerusalem. Let's come to our notes here. Just go quickly through this. Bet Shannon, situated at the important junction of the Valley of Jezreel with the Jordan Valley, about 15 miles south of the Sea of Galilee. Okay, so we're at the very south end now of this Jezreel Valley. The fertility of the land, the abundance of water led the Jewish sages to say, if the Garden of Eden is in the land of Israel, then it's named Bet Shannon. So this is they're reflecting on how beautiful the area was. And we talked about the abundance of water in the Jezreel Valley. Most of it was swampy, Mosquito Lake, but now we're at the south end. So a little bit of a rise in the land, getting out of the swampy area. Still very fertile, lots of water. Beautiful place. The 80-meter high tell reveals 19 strata of civilization. Pretty significant. It has been almost continuously settled since the 4th millennium BC. That's before the Bronze Age. That's way back there. Okay, not too far after the flood, actually. Up until modern times, 15th century BC, Pharaoh Thutmose III made it an administrative center for the control of the region. As I said, when you go up on top of the Acropolis, you can see that Egyptian administrative center. 12th century BC, it became a Canaanite city, and then we have a number of biblical references. Bet-Shan was given to the tribe of Manasseh. It was not taken by Joshua, but it was retained by the Canaanites for a period of time. Eventually, it was taken by the Philistines. Now, the Philistines are not Canaanites. And the Philistines are the same people. They come from the region of Greece, the Greek Isles. They come down, they inhabit, especially around Egypt, and then up into the region of Israel down by the sea. But they extended as far north as Bet-Shan. And we have them described in 1 Samuel 31. Now, after King Saul and his sons were killed, the bodies of Saul and his sons were taken fast into the walls of Bet-Shan, 1 Samuel 31. And then, of course, it was the men of Jabesh Gilead come from up on the Golan Heights. They come down at night stealthily. They take those bodies down. They give them a decent burial. But this is where it happened. 143 BC. Okay, now we're intertestamental period. The Maccabees, those who conquered the armies of Greece and rededicated the temple. 143, Jonathan Maccabee tried to halt the Syrians and agreed to negotiations, only to be tricked and captured. In 107 BC, the city was taken by the sons of John Hyrcanus, okay, of the Hasmonean rulers, John Hyrcanus, and the inhabitants were given the choice to convert to Judaism or leave. 64 BC, now we're getting close to our New Testament times, okay? See, that it became the only city of the 10 cities of the Decapolis to be situated west of the Jordan River. Again, its Greek name is Scythopolis. 66 AD, now, this is about the time the Apostle Paul is writing most of his epistles. Okay, 66 AD, put it in some kind of perspective. First Jewish revolt, just a few years before the destruction of Jerusalem. Vespasian made this city the winter camp for the 5th and 10th legions. So it's kind of like a major rallying point in getting ready and preparing for the conquest of Jerusalem. Many Jews of Scythopolis sided with the Romans against the Jewish revolt at this time. And then later, 13,000 Jews of Scythopolis were slaughtered by the Greek residents of the city. Jews lived in Bet-Shan after the destruction of Jerusalem. The city grew and prospered under the Byzantines, and it was made the capital of Palestina, Secunda. It declined with the Arab conquest. The Arabs didn't care too much for this Greek city, with all its Greek culture and so forth. They declined and made Tiberias the capital of the region instead at that point. Tiberias, remember, is on the shore of the Sea of Galilee. We talked about that. One of the names given to the Sea of Galilee is the Sea of Tiberias. So the decline of Scythopolis, Bet-Shan, is part of the reason why Tiberias becomes so important. AD 749 is destroyed by an earthquake. Later it was rebuilt by the Crusaders. Then you have a small Jewish community living there in 1322. The first Hebrew book on the geography of Israel was written in Bet-Shan, 1322. Would you like to have a copy of that? You should add to your library. In the 19th century, it became a small village of about 200 people. Okay, in the Roman period, we have about 15,000 to 20,000 people living in Bet-Shan. In the Byzantine period, notice how it just booms, 30,000 to 40,000 people. In 1918, under the British mandate, there were 1,710 Muslims there, 250 Christians there, and 40 Jews living in Beit Shean. But it declined a lot. The effect of the Ottomans or the entirety of the land of Israel was just devastating. Today, there are about 15,000 living in Beit Shean. That's in the modern city of Beit Shean, which is just to the west of that excavation we'll be looking at. Anyway, fascinating place. We'll get a chance to see it, walk through it, see what remains of it, and you'll love it. Now, what we're going to do is we're going to take a 10-minute break. Then we're going to come back, and I want to spend the rest of our evening talking about Jerusalem. So let's break for 10 minutes. We'll come back at 8:25.
They're getting sound. There was, I mean, I went on and I could hear sound through it, but
Doctor gonna want
yeah.
Yeah, it just looks like
A lumber room. It didn't pop up if you have before. It was an option to go live.
Yeah, I'm sure they will.
It's like just
Yeah.
automatically.
The first, I've left for a night, that's the longest that
looks like there's just something dazzle.
My brother's
Right
gonna be
there
watching
it
in
is.
1 week. And then my girlfriend and I are gonna be watching it the second week. My husband works. That's the thing, is he's been talking,
Oh, yeah.
I don't know, maybe it's gonna be harder on mom.
I was about to say that.
Sure.
I remember the first time we actually went to buy.
You know what, that's
We were on the phone.
I mean, that's my thing, is like, I wanna make sure that, I wanna communicate. I
good.
wanna make sure I can communicate.
I had a very funny thing
It's all
myself.
on my phone.
Good.
I got there,
Last View Elementary.
so I get there, and during the first classroom we clean up, one of the teachers comes in, we're on lockdown. So like 2 blocks down, SWAT's doing an arrest warrant. And they've got dogs, they've got helicopters, sheriffs in town. So we go to lockdown, so we've been on lockdown all night until the kids left. And even when I was driving over here on Cherry Creek, dogs and cops, so there's the whole road's blocked off, and I'm like, goodbye.
Where's this man?
They were serving an arrest for a felon, something, and he had a shotgun. So I was on lockdown most of the night. Yeah, Laxton Elementary.
Wow.
So that's what I did. We're going outside, we're taking out trash, and we're like, oh, 5 gunshots. Let's go back inside.
That's on 99 East?
It's on Churn Creek, right near Neighborhood Church
Also in Reading.
in Reading, yeah.
There's Blasted View and Red Block too.
Yeah, no, right here in Reading.
So the next time somebody says, aren't you afraid of being safe?
Yeah.
Say, we're really scared of is it Reading?
I know. No, the funny thing was, I'm not even thinking about that. And then right as we're going, I said, hey, what's protocols? I know I'm only a sub, but should I be aware of this? And you can't say that I shouldn't worry about it because it's never going to happen because first day here, hi.
Are you staying?
For the evening?
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, good, because I need to show you something, talk to you about something.
Yes.
We just changed lockdown where I work at a preschool and we're locked down every night, every day.
Needs your standard.
It's just standard.
Yeah.
Wow.
No, this
Well,
was.
because you're dealing with preschool kids.
Yeah,
I mean,
you can't take any chances. Yeah.
This was fun.
Well, I'm sure you're gonna talk about in Israel, when they go on a
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, anytime they take their school kids
Oh, yeah.
on an outing, they always have an arm.
Oh, yeah. We're up there, there was a kid up there and guys, you know, with the guns and stuff, and so I wanted to start talking to him. He asked me where I was from, and I said, you know, Redding. He said, oh, yeah, I know where that is. I spent some time over in Eureka and worked over there and came back here. And so there's a lot of the people that are in the military there that live in the United States or have lived here and come back for their military obligation.
Yeah, it's a great tradition among the Jewish young people after they do their military service to go on some kind of a big travel.
Push back, come with this.
So they will go through rules. So they would like to do. Take all three of them, but we have they're old enough to wear. It would visit them and be able to appreciate it. Right, she's in medical school. We stay for med school, so everyone does. That's what I told her, undergrad.
Thank you for saying that, Timothy.
I'm sorry.
It's okay.
Thank you, Timothy.
We shouldn't come to presume upon your
Thank you,
graciousness.
Timothy.
My fault, it was my fault.
Thank you for often bringing them when you are not required to.
Cruise through.
The Tyropian.
And,
Yeah, I would like a cheesemaker.
Okay.
The daughter is teaching him.
She wants to see you, but that's a great sound. See if she can do
Did you go to Bunny Hill?
an internship at
You can do Bunny Hill.
Hospital Monk Dash.
There we go.
You can watch him do the Bunny Hill.
Nancy Galagano will be there.
No, I was thinking.
Let me know if Dr. Bullock goes back.
It's really gone.
Dr. Bullock is amazing.
I know, isn't it so much fun?
Main surgeon doctor.
I could only buy one person, we have such a person.
No.
Yeah.
Yes, sir.
I'm.
I don't know why this, I would thought it was.
Oh, because I knew there was,
Really fun, so it's hard to get done.
the aisles would be.
One of the things I really saw see it for the,
Gotcha. I haven't made it down.
Yeah.
the repository.
Well, one coming in for it, like that was just fine.
Toilet, there's a lot of seats, right? He goes out there and sits on it, we take it.
So it's like-
Yeah.
Well, we have this big, sale,
Kind of like a reward.
Oh, yeah. That is a lot of steps.
Yeah. You go over there across the street, it's too hot.
On a hot day, it's really impressive.
Yeah.
But even if it's not a hot day, it's a lot of steps.
I've never owned a car.
Yeah.
I don't want
Katie said you were like kind of.
I don't know.
Get around. I was But if you had, but if you had fun, so it's not really.
But now you have a
Oh. Yeah.
Okay, Matthew,
Yes, ma'am.
real quick, please.
Yeah.
I've really been searching. These are new. This is a thing that programmed to it. The other thing there, and you can get, they said a gallon. Okay, but better than that is this. Two of them put together. Okay, same thing. All new prices.
Yes.
Okay, I'm trying to make a point here. That's 700 for one, here's 1,500 for two of them together, but they have the hot water, so they get 10,000. I think it's, maybe I'm totally wrong, but I'm thinking about your money. It seems to me the important thing is this.
Okay, let's get started.
So that they can start and we're ready when people get here. You see what I'm saying?
Talk to you about
Maybe not.
the city of the great king.
Used. See what I'm saying? So I'm looking for you. You.
Jerusalem, otherwise known as the city of David, the city of the great king. We saw in chapel, by the way, earlier this week, a video that's out now. You may be interested in, if you haven't seen it, called Covenant and Controversy. It's actually the second part. The first part was released about a year ago. The first part you can see for free on YouTube. And it has to do with the history of anti-Semitism. It's fascinating. About an hour and a half long. Part 2 was just released this past year, Covenant and Controversy Part 2. If you have an account with Vimeo, you can get it. It's not very expensive, but it has appeared for free on YouTube, that's what I know of. But it is really worth seeing. And Part 2 is called The City of the Great King. So, and it has to do with Jerusalem present and Jerusalem prophecy. Tonight, what we're going to be talking about is Jerusalem past, as well as a little bit about Jerusalem present and in the future. But it is one of the most fascinating cities in the entire world. What we're looking at right now on the map is the lay of the land. And I want to summarize our understanding of the geographical layout of Jerusalem in terms of 3 valleys and 2 hills. Jerusalem, the ancient name of Jerusalem was Salem or Shalem, coming from the Hebrew word shalom for peace. The Hebrew letter that begins the word shalom is the letter Shin, which is shaped like this. Okay? And this is an interesting way to remember the shape of the city of Jerusalem, the letter Shin. You have a valley here, and a valley here, and a valley here. The valley of Ben Hinnom, the Tyropian Valley, and then the valley of Kidron. In between, you have a hill and a hill. And that's basically what we're looking at in this map here. You'll notice that there are 3 valleys. The Kidron Valley is separating this hill right here from the Mount of Olives. So we read about the Kidron Valley in the Bible in a number of places. In the Gospels, Jesus will pray on the Mount of Olives, and then, he will actually be in the upper room, which is down in this area. He will cross the Mount of Olives over to or across the Kidron Valley over to the Mount of Olives, where you find the Garden of Gethsemane on the lower reaches of the Mount of Olives. The Mount of Olives itself is up higher than the Temple Mount here. But this Kidron Valley is an important valley. King David, when he flees from before his son Solomon, also crosses the Kidron Valley the same direction as did the Lord Jesus. So he flees across the Kidron Valley over the Mount of Olives, fleeing from his son Absalom. I said Solomon, didn't I?
Yeah.
Absalom, thank you. We also have in Ezekiel a vision of the glory of God departing from the temple across the Kidron Valley and fleeing across the Mount of Olives, and then returning for the millennial kingdom across the Mount of Olives, across the Kidron Valley, and entering into a millennial temple. So this Kidron Valley here, my own opinion, and I don't know anybody else that's written on this, but my own opinion is the Kidron Valley is also the valley of the 23rd Psalm, the valley of the shadow of death. Kidron is related to the Hebrew word kadar, which means dark, to be dark. And so as King David is reflecting on his fleeing from before his son, Absalom, he goes across this dark valley, and he reflects on that and says, though I walk through the valley of dark shadows, which is a more literal translation of the valley of the shadow of death. The valley of dark shadows, you are with me. Your rod, your rod, and your staff, they comfort me. So anyway, Kidron Valley here. Whether I'm right about Psalm 23, I don't know, but I think that's correct. Okay, the Kidron Valley, an important valley. A second valley, which is barely visible today, in fact, it's really not visible until you get south of the old city, is the Tyropoeon Valley. In biblical times, it was much deeper. It's been filled in over the years, and so when you're up here in this part of the city, you don't even see a valley here, but it's a bit more visible down in this part. But the Tyropoeon Valley was an important valley in biblical times, also known as the Valley of the Cheese Makers, because many of the cheese shops that were located right up in this area, Valley of Cheese Makers. And then the third valley is the Valley of Ben Hinnom, Valley Gay Ben Hinnom, or the Hinnom Valley, which is kind of a curved shape. And these three valleys all converge right down here, and eventually will wind up going south and emptying into the Dead Sea, down via the springs of En Gedi. So quite something. In between these three valleys, we have two hills. So we can speak of this hill, or the eastern hill. This was biblical Jerusalem in the Old Testament. It was located on this hill. The upper reaches of this hill are what is known as Mount Moriah, where Abraham offered his son Isaac as a sacrifice to the Lord. And the Lord intervened before Isaac's life was taken. The lower regions of it was the old city of Salem, then known as Jebus after that, and then Jerusalem. We'll talk about various names. But this is, the other name for this mountain that we find in the Bible is Mount Zion. When you read about Mount Zion in the book of Psalms, it's talking about this mountain. Keep that in mind as we talk about a second mountain over here. This second mountain is between the Tyropoeon Valley and the Valley of Ben Hinnom. In Old Testament times, most of Old Testament times, it's lay outside of Jerusalem. Jerusalem was limited to this mountain. Now, a city in Old Testament times, to be a defensible city, had to have a wall around it. Okay. So right here, you can see the walls around the Canaanite city and also the city that David comes to occupy. If you were to try to extend the city westward, over here, okay, north at the top, south at the bottom, west over on the left side, east on the right-hand side, if you wanted to push out onto this hill, you would have to traverse the Tyropoeon Valley. It's difficult to build a wall across a valley, and it's not as easily defended. And so just the geography kept the city for years and years limited to this very narrow eastern hill. But eventually we'll find towards the tail end of the Old Testament era, this city does expand this way. And here's the peculiar thing. if you go to Jerusalem today and you tell a cab driver, I want to go to Mount Zion, or you ask a policeman, where's Mount Zion? They'll point here, actually right here. This is Mount Zion today. But that's not biblical Mount Zion. That is coming, we think, from the Middle Ages, the period of the Crusaders, who wanted to find Zion. Same situation has happened with Constantine's mother. The Crusaders show up, they're asking the local Muslims, where is Mount Zion? And they say, well, we don't know. And so they say, well, here's 20 bucks. Can you tell me where Mount Zion is? Oh, sure. Mount Zion's right here. Okay. So Mount Zion got identified as right here. And that's Mount Zion today. But biblical Mount Zion is here. The high part of Mount Zion is Mount Moriah, the Temple Mount. So the Mount Zion you read about in the Bible is not the Mount Zion that is identified in modern day Israel. So we have 3 valleys, 2 mountains. That, broadly speaking, is Jerusalem. Original Jerusalem is on the southern slope of this eastern mountain, right down here. And the walls around it. In the time of Solomon, this is added to the north. Solomon built the temple up here on the top of Mount Moriah. In David's day, this is still owned by a Jebusite by the name of Aravna. And you might recall that in Chronicles, we're told that David sinned against the Lord by numbering the fighting men in Israel. And as a consequence of that, God punishes David by sending a plague on Israel. David, in his desire to stop the plague, purchases the threshing floor of Aravna, which is up here on this height, because that's where Aravna can pick up the wind. He can throw his wheat up into the air. The wind will carry the chaff away, and so he separates the wheat from the chaff that way. Threshing floor. Builds an altar and offers sacrifice to the Lord, the same spot that Abraham had used generations earlier to offer his son sacrifice to the Lord. And this is where then Solomon will end up building the Temple Mount. Jewish tradition says this is also the site where Adam was formed from the dust of the ground. Because the Bible says that then God put the garden eastward in Eden. Iraq, east of this location. Is this where Adam was formed? Who knows? That's the Jewish tradition. The Bible isn't located certainly. But that may be the place where Adam was formed from the dust of the ground. Okay, so there we're looking at the geographical lay of the city. Today, when you visit Jerusalem, you will hear about the Old City. The Old City is not this city. The Old City actually is identified by these green walls, which are from the 1500s AD, built by Suleiman the Magnificent. Okay, so these Old City walls are not biblical walls. The city of Jerusalem, by the time of the New Testament, is going to be identified by these white walls going out onto the western hill, crossing into today's Old City, but not all of it. And then taking in the Temple Mount, and then down here, including the Old Testament and City of David. So right in here, this white area, that's New Testament Jerusalem. But today, you have a bunch of it that's north and west of the biblical city. Most of today's Old City walls lie completely outside of the City of David. So when you come from the Temple Mount, which is inside the Old City walls today, that's about all that's was Old Testament Israel that's inside the Old City walls. Okay, so there are a lot of these confusing terms. Mount Zion. What is Mount Zion? There's New Mount Zion. There's Old Mount Zion. What's Jerusalem? There's the new Old City walls and the old City walls and the even older Old City walls in altogether different locations. but all within the scope of these 3 valleys and 2 hills. So within the scope of this, we have then Jerusalem. To the east of Jerusalem, and technically outside of Jerusalem proper, is the Mount of Olives. So the Mount of Olives is another mountain that's technically not part of Jerusalem, but is a very important mountain referred to many times in the Bible. As we said, David crosses the Mount of Olives. The Shekinah glory crosses the Mount of Olives. Jesus spends a good deal of time on the Mount of Olives, especially in the Garden of Gethsemane or here on the lower slopes of the Mount of Olives. Mary and Martha and Lazarus live up over the top of the Mount of Olives, on the upper portion of the Mount of Olives. When we first enter Jerusalem on our tour, we will view Jerusalem from the Mount of Olives, actually further up here on Mount Scopus, which is kind of a northern extension of the Mount of Olives, I guess. So, 2 hills, 3 valleys gives us Jerusalem. Now, as we think about the city of David, the city of David before David's time was known as Jebus. It was named after the Canaanite tribe who came to control this area. They were known as Jebusites. So their central city was Jebus, and it is this area right down here. Here are the old city walls, 16th century Ottoman walls built by Solomon the Magnificent. The city of David lies entirely outside of those walls. Okay? Now, before it was called Jebus, it was known as Salem. And who can tell me who is found in the old city of Salem? Genesis. Melchizedek. Okay? Melchizedek, the king of righteousness. So, back in Abraham's day, we have a city here, Salem, ruled by Melchizedek. He is both a priest and a king. He is a priest of the Most High God. And Abraham, when he returns from the conquest of the 4 kings, he comes back and he offers an offering to El Elyon, the Most High God, in conjunction with Melchizedek. That's what it's called Salem, or Shalem. So Shalem, then Jebus, then Jerusalem. In the time of the Romans, Hadrian will rename it Aelia Capitolina. Today, it is known by the Arabs as so I think I've got the notes. Anyway, the Arabs have their own name for it. The Holy City is the Arabic equivalent. Okay, so here we have it. Now, let's look at a couple of other representations of Jerusalem. From the time of Solomon, the building of the temple, until the time of Hezekiah, notice here's the city of David. Solomon expands a little bit to the west, but he can't go very far because of the Tyrolean Valley. He extends it north to include the Temple Mount. So there is some expansion of the walls. It's getting a little ways into the so-called Old City walls of Suleiman. But still, about half of it outside, roughly half of it, if you include the temple, inside those Old City walls. If you walk around the Old City walls on your free day in Jerusalem, which you can do, a very interesting walk, to walk all around here. You can see a great deal of this. But the western wall of the temple is right up in here. Between the city of David and the Temple Mount is this area called the Ophel. And it's a rising area as you're going up from the city of David up to the high point of Araunah's threshing floor. That's known as the Ophel. There are a number of excavations in this area. Somebody had a
Is
question.
that dung gate on the bottom the same dung gate that's there now?
Yes. Yes. No. This dung gate is not the dung gate that we go through. The dung gate we go through is the Valley Gate. So today's dung gate is up here. And this was the dung gate of biblical times, called the dung gate because down here is a valley. What valley is down here?
Ben Hinnom.
Ben Hinnom, okay? Okay, Ben Hinnom. And Hinnom was the place where the treasure was stayed and burned, and your refuse and all that. This is where the fire doesn't die, fire is not quenched, and the worm diet not carcasses and worms, and becomes a symbol of hell. Well known to dwellers in Jerusalem, because that was where all the disgusting things were. It was also in the valley of Ben Hinnom where Judas went and hanged himself. And the potter's field there, yeah.
Is Al-Quds the name you were looking
Yeah,
for?
thank you, Al-Quds. Al-Quds. Quds is Arabic for holy. The Hebrew equivalent is Kodesh. Kodesh in Hebrew, Quds in Arabic. Al-Quds is the city, the holy city. Thank you. That fills in all the names, I think, of that city we have. Now, in the period after the Babylonian captivity, as the Jews returned from Babylon under the leadership of Nehemiah, okay, Ezra has rebuilt the temple. Nehemiah now goes to build the walls for defensive purposes. And notice it's pared down somewhat from what you had under his glory days in Solomon. Okay, a little narrower down here. But these walls are being rebuilt on the old walls of the city of David. But it's pretty expansive up here around the temple. Okay, but still, city of David down here, Ophel leading up to Temple Mount up in here. A number of gates, and the names of these gates, some of the names of the gates remain the same, but the locations change. Okay? During the Babylonian captivity, of course, the walls were broken down, the gates were burned. This was what burdened Nehemiah so much, when he heard about the condition of the walls. And he prayed the Lord would allow him to return and lead this great rebuilding project, which he did. So here we have the white walls, of course, again, 15th century Solomon the Magnificent. But these are from the time of Solomon, about 950 BC. Come up now. Question? Comment? Yeah.
Back on the previous one, the sepulchres that they excavated, is that where we have all the burials of the kings?
Yeah. So down there to the south of the Gihon Spring, you have the tombs of the kings. There's some debate about where was David actually buried. Now, the traditional site is over on the new Mount Zion, okay, the upper room. But the recognized, acknowledged site of the tombs of the kings is over in the old eastern hill.
Can we visit that?
Yeah. Yeah, and actually probably what we'll do is the day that we go through Hezekiah's tunnels, don't want to go to Hezekiah's tunnel, we usually go down there. I don't know if we can work in both sites for everybody. Okay, so that is an option though. Okay, now, we come to the New Testament, the time of Herod the Great. And so now, again, the white walls are the new old city walls. But look at how extensive Jerusalem has expanded. Now taking in most of what you have in the old city walls of today. So the Jerusalem that Jesus knows and the apostles know takes in much more of this whole area here. Here's the Temple Mount. In Old Testament times, it's almost all south of the Temple Mount. Now we've got areas up here in the north, over here, over here. Because of the location of so many different walls, it's difficult to know exactly where some things are located. And one of the biggest debates has to do with the location of Golgotha and the burial site of Jesus. Where did it lie? Jesus, we know, was crucified outside of the city. Where was outside of the city? Was it out here? Was it somewhere in here? Was it outside of some of these walls, maybe in this area? And we'll talk about that when we talk about the different options. So the traditional site of the crucifixion and the burial of Jesus is at the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. There are good arguments for the Church of the Holy Sepulchre being the actual site. Many people prefer the site of Gordon's Calvary which is outside of these walls, also outside of this wall. And so it may be that Christ was crucified up in here. So again, we simply don't know with 100% accuracy. These are talking about locations. So if you go to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, again, what you find is a very big, very ornate shrine. In fact, to be quite blunt, you find a building filled with a lot of idolatry. Okay. Is that right?
Didn't like that place.
I hate it.
Yeah, I don't care for the Church of the Holy Sepulchre either. Gordon's Calvary looks very authentic. It reminds you very much of what the crucifixion and burial place of Christ very likely was really like. But was it the authentic site? We don't know. Does it matter? Not really. He was crucified. He was buried. He rose. The exact spot where it happened is no more holy than room 101 at Shasta Bible College. Okay? So again, John 4, neither in this mountain nor in Jerusalem. We worship in spirit and in truth. The temple of the Holy Spirit is with us. But we're going to be looking at places that try to help us view in our mind's eye what did these things look like in biblical times. The Church of the Holy Sepulchre won't help you to see that very well. But it's a fascinating place, and you need to see it. You need to experience that too. You need to be able to say, I was there and have your picture taken there. That's important. But if you're like I am, you won't care maybe a whole lot for the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. But it's an amazing piece of architecture. Okay.
Are you gonna go into the cave where all the stone came from?
Well, I don't have a slide on that, but there has been a lot of work done recently on the actual stone quarry. We'll learn about some of that when we're actually over there seeing it. And we're pretty sure we know where the stones used to build Herod's expansion of the temple came from in Herod's day. And that's actually on the route, when you walk from our hotel in Jerusalem down to the old city, you walk right by that. So we will be staying within walking distance of the old city. And when we have our free day, you can easily walk there and walk back. And it's quite fascinating. Now, here's the old city today. These are the old city walls, the new old city walls. City of David down below it. Okay. The old city is divided into 4 quarters roughly. Okay, just like this. So you have the Muslim quarter as the biggest one. Interesting that the Temple Mount is in technically the Muslim quarter. Okay. Christian quarter, the Armenian quarter, and then the Jewish quarter. So the Jewish quarter comes up against the Temple Mount. This little portion of down here is what's called the Western Wall. Today, there is a tunnel opened up, and it's only been open for a while, that goes all the way along here, along this western wall, and it comes up here in the Muslim quarter, right along this road, which is the Via Dolorosa. The Via Dolorosa, the way of sorrows that Jesus took traditionally on the way to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, right here. So Jesus took this route. Here's after this corner of the Temple Mount. Well, this corner of the Temple Mount, I guess right here, would be the it's getting late, folks.
Mosque?
What's that?
Did the mosque in the left-hand corner?
Okay, no. The mosque is down here. Here's Al-Aqsa Mosque. This one is the fortress, Antonia Fortress, up here, which is where Jesus would have been put on trial. And so from Antonia, then he would be led to the place of execution. And if it is the Holy Sepulchre Church, he would have been taken from Antonia Fortress along this road. And if the roads are in the same place, down here, then down here to the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. If he was crucified at the Garden Tomb, then you would come from Antonia Fortress down this road, down this way, outside the gate, and over here to the side of Golgotha. So the question is, where did the wall lie? And there's debate over that. So is Holy Sepulchre outside of the wall, or is the Garden Tomb outside of the wall in New Testament times?
At the Garden Tomb, the Skull Rock,
Yeah,
I sat down at location and looked right at a rock that looked just like a skull.
you can see it. It still looks like a skull today. It's a bus station today. And right behind the bus station, you see this cliff, and you can see the eye sockets and the nose and the mouth. It looks just like a skull. Yeah. Okay. We'll probably have community here at the Garden Tomb when we're there. Okay, I'm going to save that for later. Let's take a look at some more notes. We've just got about 5 minutes left. So I want to talk about Jerusalem. I think I've covered most of this material, but I want to make sure that I cover the material that's on your review sheets. Okay, so Jerusalem, location. It's up high in the hills of Judea. So again, the southernmost hills, it's way up high in Israel. About 31 miles from the Mediterranean and over 18 miles west of the north end of the Dead Sea. Jerusalem actually is pretty much in the center of Israel today. If you take a line from north to south through the land of Israel, you take another one about halfway up east to west, where those two lines intersect, that's almost exactly where Jerusalem is located. If you go to the north end of the Dead Sea, go directly west, you hit Jerusalem. You keep going, and the road actually goes this way, and you end up at Tel Aviv. The airport's right outside of Tel Aviv, Ben Gurion Airport. That's where we come in. So when we go, we're going to land here. We'll get on a bus. We'll probably come up this way. Possibly we might come down this way. We'll probably come up this way, down to the Dead Sea, and our first night is going to be spent down here at the south end of the Dead Sea. Okay. So we'll be right past Jerusalem, probably that first night on the hotel. But we'll spend some time down here, we'll spend some time up here, we'll come across here, come down, and then we'll come up and wind up our last hotel we stayed will be actually Jerusalem. This is up in the mountains right here. Valley here, coastal valley here, and mountains up the ridge. It's that inverted bowl shape we talked about. Okay, the geography, 3 valleys. Okay, we talked about that, Kidron, Ben Hinnom, and Tyropoeon. 2 hills, the eastern hill and the western hill. Okay, where is Mount Zion? Biblical Zion is the eastern hill. That's right. That's Mount Zion today, and the Jerusalem University College, which used to be the University of Holy Land Studies, is situated in Mount Zion, but it's on the western hill. Okay. Okay, so we've got 2 hills, the eastern hill and the western hill. Now, let's talk about the water source a little bit. The only dependable natural source of water for ancient city of Jerusalem is Gihon Spring. Gihon Spring is located on the eastern slope of the city of David. Remember, the city of David, south of the Temple Mount, eastern slope down into the Kidron Valley. So you go down to the Kidron Valley to the east of the city of David, you find a spring that's called Gihon Spring. This is where the ancient kings of Judah were crowned. The coronation took place at Gihon. And interesting because Psalm 2 talks about the Messiah being crowned on Mount Zion. Okay. So Solomon was not the Messiah. Some people might want to say the Davidic covenant was fulfilled in Solomon. Solomon was crowned at Gihon Spring, not on Mount Zion. Messiah Jesus will undergo a coronation ceremony on Mount Zion on the Temple Mount. This is a priest and a king. Okay, this is Gihon Spring, located on the eastern slope of David, partway up the slope of the Kidron Valley. And from the Gihon Spring came the main water source. Now, in biblical times, you had to go down to the spring and carry water up. There was discovered a shaft by Warren coming up from Gihon Spring, and it was felt for many, many years that when David sent his men to conquer Jerusalem, that he sent his soldiers up the shaft to penetrate the city. And that's what the account that you'll read in many books today. Just in the last 10 years, a dozen years, we know that theory is completely wrong. That was not the way up into the city from Gihon Spring. There has been excavated now a massive, massive staircase from the Gihon Spring leading up into the city. And that's all visible now. It's all been exposed. You can see it on your way down to Hezekiah's tunnel. You go right past it. And so the old theory is completely out. All that business about Warren's shaft is incorrect. So what happened was they would go down the staircase to the spring. That was all built in order to provide a way to the spring without going outside of the city walls, as we were saying, so that in time of warfare, you didn't get shot by your enemy. And then the outside of the spring could be covered over with brush or some other kind of structures to guard it, protect it, to hide it from the enemy so they couldn't come and poison it. But you could have access to it. What Hezekiah did in his day was he completely redirected the water supply from Gihon Spring so that it wasn't necessary to go down that staircase any longer, and he builds a tunnel underneath the eastern hill. He knows that the Assyrians are coming. He knows he's got to bring fresh water supply into the city so that if the city gets sieged and they find this guy's spring from outside, that they can still bring water in. But he knows he doesn't have very much time left. So he starts at the pool of Siloam, digging towards Gihon Spring. He takes other men, starting at Gihon Spring, digging towards the pool of Siloam, and they meet underneath. Without modern surveying equipment, without modern communications equipment. An amazing feat. But wait a minute, that's not all. It wasn't a straight line. Underground, it goes like this. In fact, it goes kind of like this. And they met halfway in between. And nobody can really explain how they did. There's lots of theories. They probably used some kind of sounding equipment from up above and people directing them, sending messages. But somehow they met. And when you go through Hezekiah's tunnel, the middle point is well marked. So you're going along, you can actually see that the roof of the tunnel is much lower than it suddenly gets higher. Because they were digging different amounts. When they met, they broke through, and then these two tunnels met. You can also see on the walls, you can see the pick marks made by Hezekiah's men. They're arcing this way, this way, this way. So they're swinging their picks. You get to the middle point, and they're going this way, this way, this way, because they were coming from the other direction. And you have to watch kind of closely. I've gone past it several times before I realized I was past it. But if you watch carefully, you can see exactly where the middle point is. And that's one of the great, I don't know if it's a miracle or not, but it's certainly a remarkable feat for taking place at that point in time. That's the water source. Okay, the old city versus the biblical city, we talked about that. The wall constructed today from 1538, Suleiman I. Talked about the four quarters, Muslim, Jewish, Christian, and Armenian quarters. There's an Arab market. You'll have fun there on your free day. Going through the souk. It's fascinating. By all kinds of interesting things there.
By the way, you might mention Google Earth. You can actually walk around in the city on Google Earth.
Okay.
Streets name.
Great. Google Earth. There you go. Okay. Okay, point number 2, the biblical city lay outside the old city, so-called old city. Now look at the history on page 19. And here's a breakdown. I'm not going to read all this, but if you have it in your notes. But 3rd millennium BC, the city is called Salem. That's the city of Melchizedek. Salem or Shalem, the word shalom, peace. Then it's called Jebus, when it comes to be occupied by this Canaanite tribe, the Jebusites. We're now second millennium BC. Coming up to the time of David, David is roughly 1000 BC. That's an easy date to remember. David conquers it from the Jebusites, using not Warren's shaft, but using the monumental staircase, going up from Gihon Spring into the city, capturing the city and making it his own capital. Prior to that, David has ruled from Hebron over the southern tribes. Unites both halves of Israel into one vast kingdom under the rule of David, and Jerusalem becomes known as the city of David. Okay, first temple, the time of Solomon, 970 BC, 586 BC. It's known as the first temple era. Prior to this time, there had never been a temple. Now, there had been a tabernacle in the wilderness. After Israel enters the promised land, the tabernacle is no longer around. You have the Shiloh first. You have the location of the Ark of the Covenant, and it gets moved around for a couple of places. The Philistines get it for a while, and it comes back to Israel. Babylonian captivity, 586 to 444 BC. Now, during the Babylonian captivity, Jerusalem is pretty much deserted. There are a few Jews who remain in the area, but most of the Jews are deported from the land. They return under Ezra, Nehemiah, and we have the second temple period. The second temple begins to be rebuilt almost right away as Ezra comes in. So 444 to AD 70 is known as the second temple era. Remember, we talked about the geological eras versus the biblical eras. We're talking about biblical eras. We're talking about the first temple, second temple. That second temple is destroyed in AD 70. And then you've got a whole history of what happens to Israel, or to Jerusalem, after the destruction in AD 70. I'm not going to go over all of it, but just notice these high points. The Hellenistic period. Hellenistic means Greek. Okay, 332 to 63 BC, intertestamental period. Alexander, the Ptolemies, the Seleucids, the Hasmoneans, and then you come to the Roman period, 63 to AD 70. This corresponds with the New Testament era. The Romans are in control. We come from the Greeks, to the Romans, then to the dispersion, beginning in AD 70, and coming in full in 135 as Hadrian then pushes the Jews out of Judea. This has now comes under pagan Roman rule. And the city becomes renamed in 135 by Emperor Hadrian, Aelia Capitolina, after the Capitoline gods of Rome. Page 21. After the Romans, the Persians moved in. Persians had it from 614 to 629. After the Persians, you have another Byzantine period. Okay, Byzantines regain control of it. These are Christian Romans and Byzantines. 629 to 638. Then it gets taken over by the Muslims. Whole Muslim period, which is going to lead you up to the Crusaders. So 638 to 1099. In 1099, you have the first Crusader period, 1099 to 1187. Then a second Muslim period. And they've got a whole bunch of different brands of Islam. The Ayyubids, the Mamluks, and then finally the Ottoman Turks. Now the Ottoman Turks will bring us up essentially to modern times. The Ottoman Turks are still in control at the time of World War I. So under the Ottomans that the old city walls are built. There's Suleiman the Magnificent. Suleiman is probably the greatest of the Ottoman Turks. After the Ottoman Turks have it, after World War I comes to an end, that whole region comes to be administered by the League of Nations. And they give a mandate to Great Britain to administer those territories, to govern them, and to set up eventually a self-governing state there. British policy at this time is defined by the Balfour Declaration, which declared that the Jews should have a homeland in Palestine. Okay. International law says the Jews got a homeland in Palestine. But it's after World War II, the British have dragged their heels. They didn't set up a nation in Palestine. They set them up all around the other areas. Created to the north. Iraq gets created over to the east. Jordan gets set up to the east. Saudi Arabia gets given to the Hashemites or to the Sauds. Egypt gets organized and so forth. But poor Palestine languishes. And so after World War II, the United Nations replaces the and the United Nations says, okay, Britain hasn't succeeded in doing so, this is what we're going to do. We're going to take it, we're going to split it up and give part of it to the Arabs and part of it to the Jews. Short story is, the Jews said, okay, we're happy with that. The Arabs said, no way, we're going to push those dirty Jews off into the sea. 1948. To everybody's surprise, the Jews won. And there has been a nation ever since then. And that nation still exists today. So that's the Reader's Digest version of the history of Jerusalem and the British Mandate, modern state of Israel since 1948. Are there any questions? Okay, we're going to be there in just a month, guys. And we're going to have a wonderful time walking around and seeing the land, walking through Jerusalem and Israel. And that's it for tonight. See you next week.
You guys should know all this by now, right? You guys should be able to be teaching this class by now, right?
It's very fun. It's very fun. That's why I don't take your tests when my audit class is way more fun.
Yeah.
So what do you think?
That's the kind that I was thinking of.
That is the kind.
That's the exact kind I was thinking of. And if we can find a double one for stupidly cheap, I would say go for it.
Well, $600 is stupidly cheap, but that's the cheapest one I saw, and it's used.